Have you ever stopped to think about what happens behind the scenes of a great story? For 400 years between the Old and New Testaments, it seemed as though God had gone silent. No new prophets, no new scriptures, just a silence that echoed. But what if that apparent silence was actually part of a divine strategy? While most people see these 400 years as a gap in biblical history, what I'm about to share will transform your understanding completely. This isn't just another historical analysis. It's a revelation of how God orchestrates events, even in apparent silence. What happened during this period would lay the groundwork for the greatest event in human. To uncover these insights, I've spent 5 years studying ancient texts, examining historical records from the Persian, Greek, and Roman empires, and analyzing countless scholarly works. I've cross-referenced multiple biblical commentaries, archaeological findings, and historical documents to piece together this extraordinary period of preparation that most people. By the end of this video, you'll understand how God uses periods of silence for divine preparation in ways that will transform your perspective on waiting seasons in your own life. You'll discover how empires rose and fell according to divine timing, how cultural transformations prepared the way for the gospel, and most importantly, how to recognize God's work in the quiet moments of your own journey. This isn't just about understanding history, it's about seeing your own story through new eyes. Part 1. The stage being set. The divine silence that changed everything. Picture Jerusalem, 433 BC. The last prophet, Malachi, has just delivered his final message. The streets of Jerusalem buzz with mixed emotions, hope intermingled with uncertainty. The temple stands proud against the setting sun, its golden surfaces catching the last rays of light. But something is about to change. The familiar voice of prophecy that had guided God's people for centuries would soon fall silent. Imagine being there, standing in the temple courtyard as Malachi's words echo off the ancient stones. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. These would be the last prophetic words Israel would hear for 4 centuries. The scroll is sealed, the prophet's pen laid down. Silence descends. Malachi's words fell complete, but this wasn't just any silence. It was like the quiet before a symphony begins, when the conductor raises his baton and the audience holds its breath. The world was about to witness the most intricate divine orchestration in history. As the prophetic voice faded, empires began to rise and fall with precise timing. First came the Persians, under whose rule the Jews found unprecedented religious freedom. King Cyrus, mentioned by name in Isaiah's prophecy 150 years before his birth, had already fulfilled the prophecy of allowing the Jews to return and rebuild their temple. Under Persian rule, Jewish communities flourished, and their scriptures were preserved. But then, like a whirlwind from the west, Alexander the Great swept across the known world. The Greek Empire rose exactly as Daniel had prophesied, the swift leopard with 4 wings. Picture Alexander's armies moving with unprecedented speed, conquering the mighty Persian Empire in just 3 years. The young conqueror who wept because there were no more worlds to conquer was unknowingly playing his part in a divine strategy. The Greek language and culture spread across the known world, creating something unprecedented in human history, a common language that would later carry the gospel to the ends of the earth. Think about it. God was preparing a linguistic highway for his message, centuries before the message would be delivered. Then came Rome. The Iron Empire that Daniel saw in his vision emerged, building roads that connected the known world. These weren't just military highways. They were divine infrastructure being laid down for the greatest message ever to be delivered. Every stone laid in those roads was part of God's preparation. But here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. During this apparent silence, the Jewish people faced their greatest cultural challenge. Under Antiochus IV Epiphanes, a Syrian king who saw himself as divine, Jerusalem faced its darkest hour. He desecrated the temple, outlawed Jewish practices, and forced Greek culture upon God's people. The stage was set for what seemed like the end of Jewish faith and culture. Yet, in this moment of crisis, an elderly priest named Mattathias and his 5 sons stood up against the mighty Syrian army. The Maccabean Revolt erupted, leading to one of the most remarkable victories in military history. A small band of faithful Jews defeated the mighty Syrian army, reclaimed and purified the temple, and witnessed the miracle of Hanukkah, when 1 day's worth of oil burned for 8 days. This victory wasn't just about military triumph. It was about preserving the very culture and faith through which the Messiah would come. God was protecting his plan, even in silence. But perhaps the most remarkable part of this story is how each empire contributed something essential for the coming of Christ. The Persians preserved the Jewish faith. The Greeks provided a common language. The Romans built the roads and created the peace necessary for the gospel to spread. Think about it. What appeared to be political upheaval was actually divine preparation. What seemed like cultural invasion was actually laying groundwork for the spread of the gospel. What looked like silence was actually God orchestrating the perfect conditions for the arrival of his Son. But if these empires were setting the stage, the next act would reveal an even more fascinating story: how God's people would respond to these massive cultural changes. As we're about to discover, the transformation that took place during these 400 years would challenge everything they thought they knew about their faith and prepare them for a message that would change the world forever. Part 2. Cultural Transformation and Resilience. Picture yourself in Jerusalem, 167 BCE. The air is thick with tension as you walk through the city streets. The magnificent temple, once a symbol of Jewish identity and faith, now stands defiled. Greek soldiers patrol the streets, their armor glinting in the morning sun. This isn't just another conquest, it's a systematic attempt to erase an entire culture. Enter Antiochus IV Epiphanes, the Seleucid ruler who would become infamous in Jewish history. Unlike previous conquerors who were content with political control, Antiochus had a more ambitious goal: to completely Hellenize the Jewish people. He didn't just want their taxes or their loyalty, he wanted their soul. The transformation began subtly. First came the gymnasium, a seemingly innocent addition to Jerusalem's landscape. Young Jewish men were encouraged to participate in Greek athletic competitions, naked, as was the Greek custom. This directly challenged Jewish modesty laws. Some Jewish priests even abandoned their duties at the temple to attend these games. Imagine the internal conflict: maintain centuries of tradition or adapt to the new cultural norm. But Antiochus wasn't satisfied with subtle changes. In a shocking decree, he banned Jewish religious practices entirely. Circumcision, Sabbath observance, and possession of Torah scrolls became capital offenses. The temple, the heart of Jewish worship, was converted into a shrine to Zeus. The final insult? Pigs, considered unclean by Jewish law, were sacrificed on the holy altar. The streets of Jerusalem, once filled with the sounds of prayers and psalms, fell silent. Families practiced their faith in secret, whispering prayers behind closed doors. Mothers performed circumcisions in hidden rooms, knowing discovery meant death. The choice was stark: abandon their faith or face execution. Then came the moment that would ignite a revolution. In the small village of Modin, an elderly priest named Mattathias faced a choice that would change history. Greek officials demanded he sacrifice to their gods. As he stood before the pagan altar, the weight of generations of faith rested on his shoulders. The crowd watched, breath held, as this respected priest made his decision. Mattathias not only refused, but, in a moment of fierce devotion, struck down both the Greek official and a Jewish man who stepped forward to comply. His cry became a battle call that would echo through generations: "Whoever is zealous for the law and maintains the covenant, let him follow me." Thus began the Maccabean Revolt. Led by Mattathias' son, Judah the Hammer Maccabee, a small band of Jewish fighters embarked on what seemed like an impossible mission. They were vastly outnumbered, under-equipped, and facing one of the most powerful armies in the world. But they had something their opponents didn't: an unshakable faith. Using guerrilla tactics and their intimate knowledge of the terrain, the Maccabees achieved the impossible. Victory after victory mounted, culminating in the recapture of Jerusalem and the Temple in 164 BCE. The story of the Temple's red dedication, where 1 day's worth of oil, miraculously burned for 8 days, would become the foundation for the festival of Hanukkah. But this victory did more than secure religious freedom. It demonstrated that cultural resilience could overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. The Maccabean Revolt became a powerful symbol of Jewish identity and resistance to assimilation, a symbol that would resonate through the centuries leading up to Jesus' time. This period saw the emergence of distinct Jewish groups responding to these pressures. The Pharisees arose as guardians of oral tradition, ensuring Judaism could adapt while maintaining its core identity. The Sadducees represented a different approach, finding ways to work within the new political reality while preserving temple worship. As the dust settled from these cultural battles, something even more profound was taking shape. The very forces that threatened to destroy Jewish identity were being transformed into tools for spreading a message that would change the world. The Greek language, once the symbol of forced assimilation, would become the vehicle for sharing God's word beyond Jewish communities. But how did this transformation occur? The answer lies in one of the most remarkable translation projects in history. Imagine standing in the bustling streets of Alexandria, Egypt, around 250 BC. The city's renowned library towers before you, its marble columns gleaming in the Mediterranean sun. Inside, 72 Jewish scholars are about to embark on an unprecedented task that would reshape the course of human history. They've been summoned by Ptolemy II, but what they don't realize is that they're about to become instruments in a divine strategy that has been unfolding for centuries. Picture the scene. These scholars, chosen from the 12 tribes of Israel, are separated into individual chambers. Their mission? To translate the Hebrew scriptures into Greek, the Septuagint. But this isn't just another translation project. The air is thick with anticipation as each scholar works independently, yet something extraordinary is happening. According to ancient accounts, when they compare their translations, they discover they've produced identical versions, word for word. This miraculous consistency becomes known as the miracle of the 72. But why was this translation so crucial? Let's pull back the curtain of history. Before this moment, God's words were locked within the Hebrew language, accessible only to a chosen few. The Jewish people had preserved these sacred texts for centuries, passing them down through generations since Moses first recorded God's laws. But now something revolutionary was happening. The same God who once confused languages at the Tower of Babel was now using language to unite people in understanding his message. The timing was perfect, almost suspiciously so. Alexander the Great's conquests had spread Greek culture and language across the known world. From the markets of Rome to the streets of Babylon, Greek had become the common tongue. It was as if God had prepared a linguistic highway for his word to travel on. But the divine preparation didn't stop there. As the Septuagint began circulating throughout the Greek-speaking world, another empire was rising, Rome. And with it came something that would change everything: roads. Not just any roads, Roman roads. Let me paint you a picture of these remarkable engineering feats. The Romans built over 2,500 miles of roads, enough to circle the earth 10 times. These weren't simple dirt paths. They were carefully engineered highways built to last millennia. Many still exist today. The Romans used a sophisticated system of layers: large stones at the bottom, gravel in the middle, and tightly fitted stone slabs on top. They even included drainage systems to prevent flooding. Think about this. The Romans built these roads for military and trade purposes. They wanted to move their legions quickly and maintain control over their vast empire. But God had a different plan in mind. These same roads would soon carry something far more powerful than Roman legions. They would carry the message of Jesus Christ. The symbolism is profound. Just as John the Baptist was prophesied to be a voice crying in the wilderness, "Prepare the way of the Lord, make his paths straight," Isaiah 43:3. These roads literally made straight paths through wilderness areas. The infrastructure for the greatest message in history was being laid by those who had no idea they were serving God's purposes. Consider the Apostle Paul's journeys. These Roman roads enabled him to travel approximately 1,000 miles, establishing churches and spreading the gospel throughout the empire. Without this infrastructure, the rapid spread of early Christianity would have been nearly impossible. But here's the most incredible part. All of this, the Greek language, the Septuagint translation, the Roman roads, was in place before Jesus was even born. While the world saw silence, God was orchestrating the most elaborate preparation in history. The stage was being set for a message that would transform the world. This wasn't coincidence. It was divine choreography. The same God who planned the exodus from Egypt centuries in advance was now preparing the world for an even greater deliverance. The Septuagint would allow people to read prophecies about the coming Messiah in their own language. The Roman roads would enable his message to spread rapidly across the known world. Even the peace enforced by Roman rule, the famous Pax Romana, would provide the stability needed for the gospel to spread without interference. But if this level of preparation was happening during the silent years, imagine what was yet to come. As these pieces fell into place, another prophecy was about to be fulfilled, one that would break the silence in the most unexpected way. The stage was set, the actors were in position, and the greatest story ever told was about to begin. What's particularly fascinating about this divine preparation is how it continues to echo through history, showing us that even in our own periods of apparent silence, God might be orchestrating something far greater than we could imagine. But before we explore that connection, let's look at how these preparations would ultimately culminate in an event that would change the course of human history forever. Part 4. Lessons for today. Divine timing in the seasons of silence. Picture yourself in Jerusalem, 167 BCE. The morning sun casts long shadows across the temple courts as a young Jewish priest named Mattathias stands frozen, watching Syrian soldiers march through the streets. The temple, once filled with the sweet aroma of incense and the melodious sounds of worship, now reeks of sacrificed pigs, a deliberate desecration by Antiochus IV Epiphanes. The priest's hands tremble not with fear but with righteous anger. For 5 years, the Jewish people had endured increasingly harsh persecution. Their sacred scrolls were burned, circumcision was forbidden, and mothers who dared to circumcise their sons were executed along with their infants. This wasn't just cultural oppression. It was an attempt to erase their very identity as God's chosen people. The silence from heaven seemed deafening. One fateful morning, Syrian officers arrived in Mattathias's village of Modane. They set up an altar and demanded he sacrifice to their gods, a moment that would ignite the Maccabean Revolt. "Even if every nation obeys the king," Mattathias declared, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "I and my sons and my brothers will live by the covenant of our ancestors." What followed was extraordinary. This single act of defiance sparked a revolution that would eventually restore Jewish independence and cleanse the temple. But here's what's fascinating. This wasn't just a political uprising. It was divine preparation in disguise. Consider this. If the Maccabean Revolt hadn't preserved Jewish identity and independence, what would have remained of Jewish culture by the time Jesus was born? The very people he came to save might have been completely assimilated into Greek culture, losing the prophecies and promises that identified him as the Messiah. But the story doesn't end there. Fast forward to today. Sarah, a young professional in Manhattan, sits in her apartment, staring at her phone. For the 3rd time, she's been passed over for a promotion she deserves. The silence from HR feels like the silence of heaven. "God, are you even listening?" she whispers. What Sarah doesn't realize, what none of us realize in our moments of waiting, is that these periods of silence are often God's most active seasons of preparation. Just as the 400 years between the testaments weren't really silent but filled with crucial preparation, our personal seasons of silence are rich with divine purpose. Think about how the pieces fell into place during those 400 years. The Greek language spread, creating a common tongue for the gospel to be shared. Roman roads were built, providing paths for missionaries. Synagogues were established, creating ready-made venues for the early church. Each seeming setback or challenge was actually setting the stage for something greater. This brings us to a profound truth. God's silence doesn't mean his absence. During the intertestamental period, while prophets were silent, empires were being positioned, languages were being unified, and hearts were being prepared. Similarly, in our own lives, seasons of silence often precede seasons of significant breakthrough. Consider Daniel's prophecies about the 4 empires. Each one seemed like a catastrophe to the Jews living through it, but each served a crucial purpose in God's plan. The Persian Empire allowed the Jews to return home. The Greek Empire spread a common language. The Roman Empire built roads that would carry the gospel. What looks like chaos to us might be choreography to God. The parallels to our lives are striking. That job you didn't get? It might be protecting you from a corporate downsizing 6 months from now. That relationship that didn't work out? It might be preparing you to meet someone who will walk with you in your God-given purpose. That dream that seems delayed, like the temple that waited 400 years for the Messiah. When Jesus finally stepped into the temple, everything was ready. The language to spread his message was in place. The roads to carry his gospel were built. The hearts of people were prepared. Nothing was wasted, nothing was delayed, and nothing was truly silent. This teaches us a crucial lesson. God's silence is often his setup. In those moments when heaven seems quiet, the greatest preparations are often underway. Just as the 400 years of silence prepared the world for Jesus, your season of silence might be preparing you for your divine moment. But this revelation leads us to an even more intriguing question. If God used the silent years so strategically then, how might he be using your silent season right now? Let's explore what this means for your journey. Conclusion: breaking the silence. Picture yourself standing in Jerusalem around 5 BC. The air is thick with anticipation, though most don't realize why. For 4 centuries, the streets have echoed with whispers of ancient prophecies passed down through generations. The temple stands gleaming in the morning sun, rebuilt and restored, yet something or someone is missing. Let me take you back to the moment when everything changed. In a small town called Nazareth, a young priest named Zacharias serves in the temple, continuing the faithful tradition maintained through those silent centuries. The incense burns as it has for hundreds of years, its smoke rising like the prayers of countless faithful before him. But this day is different. Suddenly, the silence of 400 years shatters. An angel appears to Zacharias standing at the right side of the altar of incense. The first divine messenger since the prophet Malachi speaks, marking the end of the great silence. Zacharias trembles, his hands gripping the altar for support. The angel's words echo through the sacred space. "Do not be afraid, Zacharias, for your prayer has been heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall call his name John." This moment, described in Luke's Gospel, wasn't just about one couple's miracle. It was the culmination of centuries of preparation. Think about it. During those 400 years, the Persian Empire had risen and fallen, allowing the Jews to rebuild their temple. Alexander the Great had spread Greek culture and language throughout the known world, creating a common tongue for the gospel to spread. The Roman Empire had built roads connecting distant lands, unknowingly paving the way for missionaries to travel. The story reaches its crescendo when we realize that John, promised to Zacharias, would become John the Baptist, the prophesied voice crying in the wilderness, preparing the way for Jesus Christ. Every empire that rose and fell, every cultural shift, every road built, had been leading to this moment. But here's what makes this story extraordinary. The silence wasn't empty. Just as a composer doesn't write music on every line of the staff, God used the silent periods to create something magnificent. The Jewish people had preserved their faith through the Maccabean Revolt. The rise of synagogues had created centers of learning ready to receive the gospel, and the Septuagint had made the scriptures accessible to the Greek-speaking world. Consider the dramatic timing, just as Rome achieves its greatest power, establishing the Pax Romana, Roman peace, creating unprecedented stability and communication networks throughout the known world. At that precise moment, the silence breaks. It's like a master playwright waiting for exactly the right moment to raise the curtain. The angel's appearance to Zacharias wasn't just the end of silence. It was the beginning of the most important chapter in human history. Within months, another angel would appear to a young woman named Mary, and the promise of all those silent years would begin to unfold. This brings us to a profound truth. What appears to be divine silence is often divine preparation. Think about the silence in your own life. Those moments when heaven seems quiet might actually be the prelude to something extraordinary. Just as those 400 years set the stage for Jesus' arrival, your waiting period might be preparing the world for what God wants to do through you. As Arthur Lay prepared for his great descent to earth, he developed the necessary mindfulness and awesome intentionality to prepare his way. Now knowing this, what will you do with your own periods of silence? Are you recognizing the preparation taking place, or are you letting the waiting consume you? Think about God's promises and the divine preparation that might be unfolding in your journey. Today, we've journeyed through one of history's most fascinating periods. 400 years that seemed silent but were filled with divine orchestration. We've discovered how God used empires, languages, and roads to prepare the world for its greatest moment. But this isn't just ancient history. It's a blueprint for understanding your own story. Think about it. Every road the Romans built, every Greek word that spread, every synagogue that rose from the ground, all of these were pieces of a master plan that no one could see at the time. Just like those ancient days, your period of waiting might be God's preparation for something extraordinary. Here's the challenge I want to leave you with. What if your current silence isn't empty at all? What if, like those 400 years, it's pregnant with purpose? What if every challenge you're facing, every closed door, every moment of waiting is actually setting the stage for your next chapter? The question isn't whether God is working. The question is, are you ready to recognize His preparation in your own story? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share in the comments below. What's your biggest takeaway from these 400 years of preparation? How does this change your perspective on the waiting seasons in your life? What Roman roads might God be building in your life right now? Your story matters, and your perspective could be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Don't keep it to yourself. Share it in the comments below. If this message has impacted you, don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Together, we'll continue uncovering the profound mysteries that connect ancient wisdom to your daily life. Every week, we dive deep into stories that will transform your understanding of faith and purpose. I want to personally thank you for staying with me through this journey. Your commitment to understanding these deeper truths is inspiring. Remember, sometimes the most significant chapters of your story are written in silence. This isn't goodbye. It's an invitation to join me next week as we explore another fascinating chapter that connects our past to our present. Don't miss it. Subscribe now, and let's continue this journey together. Until next time, keep watching for those divine preparations in your own story. They're happening right now, even if you can't see them yet. God bless, and I'll see you in our next exploration.